In 1980, there was a political scientist called Robert Axelrod who devised a game based on the prisoner's dilemma. It's called the prisoner's dilemma is the idea that in a vacuum, the most rational choice for any organism is basically extreme self-preservation. This is also the same idea that was proposed by evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene. So what does that actually mean? Well, let's consider the impala. Impalas suffer, as do we all, from the blight of disease-carrying ticks. But when you can't reach every part of your body to remove them, you become reliant on help. But that flies in the self of self-preservation, meaning that in a hostile environment when resources are scarce, why would you spend your time, energy, and resources helping others? If you don't have ticks, why would you take the time to pull them off of others? Well, in any individual situation, that is the logical thing to do. Prioritise yourself over others. You've got no ticks, so screw those who have, as long as you're alright. But life isn't just one prisoner's dilemma in a vacuum after another. Everything is connected, and your actions in the past and present determine your future. So if you, an impala, choose not to groom others when you can, then when you need it most, there will be nobody there to groom you. So let's go back to 1980. So Axelrod created this game on the same principle. It's actually the same principle as the TV show Golden Balls, if you know it. So the game went as follows. Every player must submit a strategy before the game starts, and every player plays against every other player for a random amount of rounds, averaging 200 rounds per game. The goal is to get the most amount of points. So the points are earned by cooperating or stealing. If both players cooperate, they earn 3 points each. If both players steal, they earn 1 point each. But if one player cooperates and the other one steals, the thief earns 5 points while the other earns no points. So there were a total of 62 entries, and they naturally fell into two categories, nice and nasty. This was defined by whether or not a strategy would initiate a steal or not. So for an example, one nice strategy was to cooperate until their opponent stole once, and then it would steal every round until the end of the game. Basically the equivalent of being nice but holding a grudge. An example of a nasty strategy was to start by cooperating in round 1, then just to copy its opponent, but 10% of the time it would randomly steal. So the game was run 5 times over, and every single time it came back with the same results. Axelrod found that all of the top performing strategies shared 4 key qualities. So first of all, they were all nice, and all the nice strategies ended the game with significantly more points than the nasty strategies. Not just slightly better off, like orders of magnitude better off. So basically that means the ones that never picked a fight always came out on top. Even though that's not what we've been led to believe in society, we were taught that the one who fights most and the hardest ends up the most successful. Secondly, they were all retaliatory, meaning if an opponent steals, they respond straight away with a punishment. Thirdly, they were all forgiving. A forgiving strategy is one that can retaliate but doesn't hold a grudge, so it doesn't let the past actions of another dictate the decisions it's making in the present. And lastly, being clear. Basically, if a strategy was overly complex, the opposing strategy wouldn't be able to figure out the pattern. It just looks like randomness when it gets too convoluted. So with no trust, most strategies would just end up stealing. In every simulation, the most basic strategy came out on top, and it was called tit for tat. The tit for tat strategy simply cooperated until its opponent steals, and then it would steal on the next turn, and then go back to cooperating. That's it. So you can see how it adheres to those 4 principles. Now I find it absolutely fascinating. The idea that even faced with all of the nasty strategies trying to take advantage, it's still better in the long run to be nice and forgive without being a pushover and to communicate clearly. So it appears that that's some kind of universal law. There are a couple of issues here with trying to extrapolate this to the real world, the main one being that this game doesn't allow for time or evolution. It's a closed loop, basically. And secondly, it assumes that there are roughly an equal amount of nice strategies as there are nasty strategies. But when you put time and evolution into the mix, things start to get a little bit wild. So imagine a world where almost everyone is operating on a nasty or a selfish strategy. I know it's difficult to imagine, but there are also a handful of people using nice strategies. So if Axelrod's experiment teaches us anything, it's that people with nice strategies working together will almost always end up with more points than those who do the opposite. So if people working together yields more benefits than any other situation, it stands to reason that over time those individuals would converge in groups, and those groups would grow. Eventually, if you're operating on a nasty strategy, you're left with no real choice but to accept that it's a suboptimal way of living. You have to face the realization that everybody else doing well holds infinitely more value to you as an individual than you doing well and everybody else suffering. In other words, you can be the most selfish person in the world, but you're always going to be better off in the end by sharing instead of competing, no matter what you might think. The other side of this that comes with evolution is reproduction, or kids. It's a bit of a tangent, but there's a scene from a great film called Lucy, and Morgan Freeman's character is given a lecture about the nature of life. And he makes the point that any cell or organism spends all of its energy trying to get more time, meaning everything does what it does in order to live longer. And he goes on to say that there are two ways of doing this. You can choose immortality or you can choose reproduction. And if an environment is hostile and unforgiving, an organism will tend to choose immortality or self-preservation. And we see this now reflected in our society. Birth rates are dropping because the environment is hostile. Why would you want to bring a child into this world? Have you seen the state of it? It's already hard enough to survive, so many are choosing self-preservation. But if an organism is sufficiently safe, in a safe and nurturing environment, it will choose to reproduce. So let's go back and apply this to Axelrod's game. So nasty strategies living in a hostile environment will choose self-preservation, or selfishness. And nice strategies in a safe environment will reproduce. So between increased birth rates and nasty strategies changing to nice after realising it's more beneficial, this shows that it only takes a small island of nice in a sea of selfishness to create a ripple effect capable of turning the tide. And this seems to be backed up by some universal law. Now, I've never been the most spiritual or religious person. In fact, I spent most of my 20s self-described as a borderline militant atheist. But everything I've just said sounds a whole lot like what people refer to as karma. Over the past few years, I've been delving into the spiritual and the religious, mostly because after so long of trying to disprove it, believing it was all just hippie nonsense, I couldn't help but want to understand what gave these people such unwavering faith in things that sounded so ludicrous to my ears. Evil entities, energy, intentions, other realms, it just sounds like fairy tales. But the more questions I asked, the more overlap I started seeing, and I came across a video this morning on social media, and it was of someone asking AI basically what's the wildest conspiracy theory that's most likely to be true. And it said that in essence, there's a constant battle between good and evil raging unseen to people, like a battle for our souls that we don't even know that we're fighting. That there are dark forces out there trying to negatively affect your decision making, which is basically the Satan storyline from Christianity, because they feed on chaos, pain, and misery. It went on to say that we do exist in some kind of manufactured matrix, and our information has been so manipulated that we can't even perceive reality anymore. That we've been made to create and enforce our own prisons through the manipulation of free will, the illusion of choice. Now, you can choose to believe that or not, but it seems to be the fundamental nature of basically all spirituality and religion. Good versus bad, or in some instances, energy and balance. But it's all pretty much trying to describe the same thing as far as I can tell. Every aspect of life seems to be on a pendulum. The further you get from the centre, the more chaotic things get. If you get too kind, you get screwed over. You're too mean and nobody will help you. Too much fun, no work gets done. Too much work leads to exhaustion. It always seems to be best to be in the middle, or balanced. You could also describe that as yin and yang, or tit for tat, as we described it earlier, a nice strategy. No matter where I look, this universal law seems to apply, from politics to society to deciding what to cook for dinner. And it's always the same, it's always nicer for everyone involved when it's balanced. This is fundamentally what our ethos is predicated on. Cooperation is better than competition for everyone, and we aim to be living proof of that so others can see there is a better way to live. All we've done is take a universal law that even regardless of the stats and facts, we all sort of know deep down is true. And we've applied that to the world around us. So when we get asked, how are you so confident that you'll succeed? Why do you have so much confidence in your plan? Well, the way we see it, we're just doing what the universe seems to be telling us we should do in order to succeed. Confidence doesn't really come into it. We're just following instructions, and pretty basic ones at that. The difficult part is doing this in a world already full of suffering, with a system built to put every barrier in the way of diverging from said system. But we do believe it is still achievable, so that's what we're doing, and that's why we're doing it.